I now call officers from the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Mr Reid, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, I've provided a document which I think will have been provided to you for tabling, so it's quite short.
Yep. The committee tables the document.
As you've been previously advised earlier in proceedings, last Friday, the 6th of February, the Commission was notified by the Inspector that she'd commenced a complaint investigation under Section 1841E of the National Anti-Corruption Commission Act regarding the Commissioner's involvement in defence referrals and assistance to the IGADF. Whilst we've provided substantial amounts of documentation and information in response to the Inspector's preliminary inquiries, it's now at a point where it's a complaint investigation, and we'll respond to the Inspector within the framework and the process of investigation which are mandated by the Act. But in order to avoid prejudicing the investigation, including the procedural fairness process under the NACC Act, I'll not be able to answer questions about matters within the scope of the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Reid. We'll proceed to questions, and I'll go to Senator Blythe.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for that. And we will certainly respect the integrity of that investigation. So there is a whole lot of questions that I won't ask you, because obviously that is changing as we speak. In terms of delays and resourcing issues for the NACC, you've received over 3,000 referrals in your first year, which is a huge workload. Can you confirm how many of these referrals remain unassessed or are still waiting preliminary triage?
Right. Okay. I think I have a piece of paper here that maybe it was a Quan that we've answered. Sorry. Let me just. Because we did recently put on the record the number. Yeah, here it is. So this was an answer to a question on notice at another committee, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on the NACC, on the 11th of December, and it was asked by Dr Haynes. And so the answer that was provided in relation to has there been any change in the numbers since the end of the reporting periods that we've referred to in the 2023 annual report and the 2024-25 annual report. And the answer was yes. The number of open referrals outside the 90-day target has been reduced from 440 at the end of 2024-25 reporting period to 266 as at the 19th of January 2026, and the number of them that were received in 23-24 has reduced from 159 to 78. So there's been a substantial inroad, but there's still a small backlog there.
Do you feel as though your current staffing levels allow you to meet your statutory expectations?
Yes. The challenge in these areas as an organisation that's just turned 2.5 is bedding down processes with staff who are still learning their skills at a time when we also were in a position of a significant attrition rate going on in the first 2 years of our operations, and that's slowed in this third year. Okay. So you've got these elements of starting a new process with virtually nobody from the predecessor organisation that had been involved in the assessment process, as we call it more widely, transferring into the National Anti-Corruption Commission, staff turnover, bedding down processes, and so I think we're at a point where we've turned the corner at just over 2.5 years, but there's still a significant issue that we have to try and deal with over time, because this work never stops.
No.
Whilst the numbers may have declined from that first year, where I think that there was a significant number of people just waiting for this organisation to begin. At the moment, the numbers for that have come through the door in this financial year are, and we put this on our website, 1,583. So roughly in half of this current financial year and reporting period, we've had just under half of what came through in the first year. So it keeps coming in. We have to keep assessing. It's a never-ending process for the staff to undertake, and I suspect that some people probably don't see an end in sight to being able to, have done this amount of work, and therefore you have a breather because the work keeps coming in. And that's the nature of the assessment processes, and it was the same at the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption when I was there for 5 years.
Can I just ask a follow-up question in relation to that, with
Senator
Senator Blight's
Scarr.
indulgence? And I asked this question having previously served as the chair of the Oversight Committee for the previous anti-corruption agency at a federal level that was limited in its jurisdiction to law enforcement agencies, so the Law Enforcement Integrity Commission. And I was just somewhat concerned by your comment that there'd been limited migration, if I can put it that way, of people who were performing that function under the previous agency to the NACC. My understanding was that arrangements had been entered into for those staff to come across to the NACC, so that the NACC from day one would have the benefit, A, of their general expertise, but also B, their experience with respect to dealing with particular matters that were still in train. So why hasn't that worked?
So there's probably 2 or 3 different ways of answering this, but if we look at ACLE in its final year, 22-23, it started the year with 80 staff. By the end of the year it had 180 because of the active work to recruit in as the legislation was passing through the Parliament.
Yep.
And so you had a lot of people that arrived, and there were people leaving. Of some of the 80 that were there at the beginning of the financial year had left by the end. And so in some areas there's a great deal of wealth of experience that came across, and everybody had the opportunity to move across, no question about that. But in the assessment area it was fairly limited because it was always a very small function, and the history of ACLE was that they struggled at times to resource that particular area, and their numbers did ebb and flow quite a lot. So yes, there were 180 people that moved into the NACC on day one, but a lot of those people had only been there less than 6 months, and therefore I think what they thought they were coming to wasn't necessarily what they came to. The National Anti-Corruption Commission being bigger but also with broader jurisdiction, I think was something that people didn't necessarily have in their minds when they put their hand up, and that's why I think we had the attrition rate over those first 2 years that was reasonably high. But it was particularly high in the area we call evaluations, the assessment area. It was one of the highest, and so it went through a significant period of reduction of staff and having to rebuild, and we're now close to full numbers in that area. But we've got some people acting in roles, and we're going out to the market constantly to try and keep recruiting, and that's got to also be weighed up with the volume of material that you're trying to deal with on any day of any week.
Yep.
So it's not a criticism of ACLE, it's just the reality of what was available at the time of moving across. It appeared that we had a couple of senior staff that were well versed in the assessment area, and that changed about 6 months in for a couple of different reasons. So.
And just to be clear, I wasn't criticising ACLE or seeking to do so in any way. I think
No, I wasn't either.
I was more concerned about the manifestation of a lack of migration of people, successful migration, long-term of people, and why that might have been. But I'm happy with your answer. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blythe.
Thank you. And I guess going back to the triaging of, and it seems like an endless churn, as you've sort of described. How many of those outstanding assessments do you think would be relating to the current Labor government?
Oh, I mean, we normally wouldn't talk about what is within the referrals. We unless it's on the public record, we don't normally comment on what has been referred or what might have been referred to us, and that's partly for operational reasons about not wanting to prejudice our ability to consider matters, but on the other hand, we don't want to impact on reputation. So we've been fairly clear that we don't provide regularly or generally at all information about what's in there, but what we do provide, and we have provided in our updates, is the nature of the issues that are coming across to us, and particularly where we're doing investigations, what the generic sort of area, but we don't usually talk about the individual department or work parliamentarians, which part of the parliament or former parliamentarians we are quite clear in our minds that that's inappropriate.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Senator Blythe. Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Reid, for your attendance and your staff. You said that you wouldn't answer any questions about the most recent investigation by the inspector into possible maladministration or officer misconduct by the NACC and the Commissioner because of procedural fairness reasons. You said procedural fairness provisions in the Act.
Yes.
Can you point to the procedural fairness provisions in the Act that would be breached by you disclosing to this committee?
So I might turn to my colleague Rebecca Omar for a bit more detail on that.
Yes, certainly. Rebecca Omar, General Manager Legal, Senator. So in terms of the concern that we have about answering questions that are currently subject to the inspector's investigation, we're very conscious that we don't want to prejudice that investigation in any way. And so there's a couple of parts to that. The first one is in terms of what the inspector's doing. We don't want to interfere with that or prejudge anything in terms of any answers we give. And then the second part to that is in terms of the procedural fairness requirements that are in the Act in relation to the investigation. I think it's 213 of the NACC Act that outlines a process that the inspector will go through. And part of that is when she has her draft report, she will provide that to the Commission for comment before moving to a final report.
How do answering questions to this Parliamentary Oversight Committee in any way limit the Commission's role in assessing a draft report from the NACC inspector? How would that limit the procedural fairness, whatever rights the Commissioner or Commission have in assessing a draft report from the inspector?
It's because that process is embedded in the Act whereby that's how the investigation proceeds, and the ability then for the inspector to consider all the evidence and then to put that before the Commission to consider that as the full evidence that has been gathered and then to respond as part of that process rather than the questions taking place in a public forum and the issues being ventilated there.
Well, I'm mystified as to how you say this will impact procedural fairness in a process being undertaken by the inspector who's already shown an incredible capacity to exercise her statutory powers with procedural fairness and care. How does answering questions about what's happening in this committee, with its separate oversight role, in any way negatively impact that procedural fairness? You just asserting that it does, I'm mystified about how you say it will negatively impact the rights.
Senator, I don't know whether I can take it too much further. I can let you know that we had consulted with the inspector in terms of the position that we would be taking in relation to the evidence given at estimates, and asked the inspector if she had any concerns in relation to our position, and she did not raise any concerns with us.
It's not her job to tell you how to respond to a parliamentary inquiry. She has important statutory jobs, but it's not her job to tell you how to respond to questions from Parliament in the parliamentary oversight of the NACC, is it?
That's definitely true,
Yeah,
Senator, but we were consulting with the inspector because she is the one conducting the investigation.
This is now the second time, isn't it, that the inspector has commenced an investigation like this into the NACC and the NACC Commissioner, Mr Reid? The second time we've had an investigation about potential agency maladministration or officer misconduct?
Well, the second time that an investigation's looked at an area of the Commission's operations and the role of the Commissioner in that. So yes, the first one, as you'd be well aware, was what started as an inquiry on the 13th of June 2024 into the previous week's decision by the Commission about the robo-debt referrals, and that then morphed into an investigation which ultimately produced its report on the 30th of October 2024, and you know the outcome of that.
Yeah, which was a finding that the Commissioner had failed to adequately deal with actual or perceived conflicts of interest, and that's come at great cost to the taxpayer, hasn't it, that finding?
Well, I think...
Well, not the finding, but the conduct that led to the finding.
Well, but you've canvassed that view with the Commissioner present at the Parliamentary Joint Committee of the NACC, and I think he and Deputy Commissioner Kilgour were clearly of the view that had we investigated at that point, we would have ended up bringing in significant external legal support.
How much have we paid so far, as the public, have taxpayers paid so far to Jeffrey Nettle, because he's had to be brought in to clean up the mess that was left when Commissioner Brereton failed to deal with his conflict of interest on the referral?
The recommendation of the inspector's report was that the matter be reconsidered. We undertook that. And
how much does it cost?
And, well, that's a separate issue to the cost of then the investigation that he is assisting with. And so he...
No, Mr Reid, you were required to bring in somebody who had no connection with the Commissioner and hadn't been in any of those meetings where he'd been in, despite having had a conflict of interest that he hadn't dealt with. You were required to bring in this case, a former High Court judge at significant expense because of the findings of the inspector. And do you not agree with that?
Sorry,
Well,
before you answer,
what we
Mr.
ended up-
Reid, I'll just interrupt for a second and just remind senators that it is appropriate that we allow witnesses to answer questions that have been asked. And there's been a couple of times where Mr. Reid's been interrupted now, and I just want to make sure that we're getting back to listening to the responses from witnesses at the table. Thank you. Mr. Reid.
Thank you. So as at the 1st of December 2025, Mr Nettle has been paid $998,250 inclusive of GST, and that's against a contracted amount of $1.138 million.
And Mr Nettle's contract last time, if I remember correctly, was I think to February of this year?
The end of February.
Yes. Will the contract conclude at the end of February? Are there negotiations to extend it?
At this point, yes, it will conclude at the end of February, and that's what's on Oz tender. The contract amount is there. So,
the NACC Commissioner received correspondence from the Attorney General on the 10th of October.
that's correct.
Where the Attorney General stated to Commissioner Brereton, amongst other things, your recent declarations of interest and your earlier declarations of interest provided to the former Attorney-General on the 11th of August 2023 do not provide details of the nature and extent of the activities you are undertaking at the request of the IGADF. Did you see that correspondence on or about the 10th of October? Were you given it by the Commissioner?
Yes, I saw it on the 10th of October when it arrived, and the Commissioner provided it to myself and to the statutory office holders on that day.
And were you part of drafting the 9-page response that came from Commissioner Brereton to the Attorney-General?
The 10th of October was my final day before going on just over 3 weeks of annual leave out of Australia. So I wasn't. I was aware of the letter. I was aware that a draft would be put together and there would be consultation within there. Had I been in the office, I would have been part of that. I've now seen and I'm aware of the response as it was drafted.
So who was fulfilling your duties while you were on leave?
So there was an acting Chief Executive Officer, but I'm quite happy to take questions about the issue.
Who was the acting Chief Executive Officer while you were on leave?
It was my colleague Pete Ratcliffe over here.
All right. Well, was Mr Ratcliffe in the role as acting CEO? Mr Ratcliffe, were you consulted and part of providing the response, the 9-page response from Commissioner Brereton back to the Attorney-General?
Thank you, Senator. Peter Ratcliffe, General Manager, Operational Capabilities. Yeah, I was acting in the role from Monday the 13th of October through to the 7th of November. I wasn't originally aware that the letter had come in because in my normal position I wouldn't be made aware of such.
And sorry, what is your normal position, Mr Ratcliffe?
Operational capabilities, so I deal with our intelligence collection, our use of covert powers, and provide basically assistance and capability to our operational...
Your current tag says General Manager. Has that been a change?
No, so I'm General Manager of Operational Capabilities.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, so I was acting for that period. I hadn't been made aware that there'd been a letter from the attorney because in my normal role I wouldn't have seen that. I first became aware that there'd been a letter on Monday the 20th of October when a member of the legal team asked me if I would like to see the draft that was ongoing. I was then aware that the draft was occurring, but because I was in an acting position and hadn't had any of the sort of history of how this had come about, I didn't contribute to the drafting, right. but I did see it.
Yeah, but so Mr. Reid didn't give you a briefing? I mean, it was and I'll probably ask this to Mr. Reid, high profile, I would have thought, high front of your mind. The Attorney-General's asking a whole series of pointed questions about what the Attorney-General sees as perceived failures to answer conflicts of interest. Just 3 days before you go on leave, and you don't give your acting CEO even a brief about it? You don't say, this is pretty hot, you better deal with this while I'm away?
Senator, my final day was Friday the 10th. The letter arrived I think towards in the afternoon of that day. Uh-huh. There was a lot of things that I was trying to finalise before I left. It had been the first time I'd gone on leave for 2 years, and so there was a lot of things that needed to be finalised. And so,
a letter from the attorney.
The letter is to the Commissioner. The other statutory office holders were aware that it existed. The legal branch, who are actively involved in these areas, were involved in assisting in developing a response. I don't see any difficulty, Senator, about not having done any major handover to my colleague here, because these things, in my experience, are dealt with generally within that group of the Commissioner, myself and legal. So
Well, you say the Commissioner yourself, but while you're on leave, Mr Ratcliffe was meant to be filling your role as CEO. And I would have thought, maybe I'm wrong, an important role in dealing with issues of integrity and transparency, and an important role in responding to a query that's come from the Attorney General.
Yeah.
But you didn't even tell him about it.
Senator, look, I've given you my answer. I'm quite comfortable with what occurred in terms of my approach to this on my final day before going on leave, knowing that in the discussions with the other statutory office holders, it was quite clear that the Commissioner was going to be primarily involved in the drafting of the letter. So I don't really see what the issue is here, Senator.
Well, one of the issues might be if you'd read the Attorney's letter, because the Attorney was deeply troubled, amongst other things, about conflicts of interest not being informed to the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, the failure to ensure the Chief Executive Officer was in the loop on conflicts of interest. And then the very day you get the letter, you don't even tell the incoming acting CEO. Like, it was actually in the Attorney's own letter. How do you explain that? Or is it just no respect for what the Attorney's
I've answered the question,
raising?
Senator. I don't think I've got to explain anything more about it. I'm not really sure that you're going to progress this by trying to somehow suggest that I've done something inappropriate. I haven't.
Well, the Attorney
Full
said wanted confirmation of steps by the Commissioner about how the CEO is kept informed about conflicts of interest. And while you're away, the acting CEO didn't even know about the Attorney's letter and the Attorney's concerns. And you don't see a problem with that?
No, I don't.
Okay, all right. The Attorney was also concerned, perhaps I'll just read on the concern from the Attorney to the Commissioner. In your declaration, you note that if a matter comes before the Commission affecting the interests of any individual or entity with which you have an affiliation, you will consider if an actual or perceived conflict arises and, if necessary, take steps to mitigate it. I would suggest it would be preferable for you to declare all relevant affiliations and interactions to the CEO. If an actual conflict of interest arises, it should always be mitigated through non-participation in decision-making. Have you now implemented that process, where if an actual conflict of interest arises, it will always be mitigated through non-participation? Is that part of your rules?
That is exactly what we've explained to you previously in other Senate appearances, which is that as a result of the Robodebt report by the inspector, in November 2024, the terms of reference for the National Anti-Corruption Commission Senior Assessment Panel were changed to ensure that there was no question about the need to declare conflicts of interest or perceived or potential conflicts of interest for the consideration of referrals that had come in. That's extended to, or has always been in place for people doing the referrals. It's also been in place for people that are investigating the referrals. So that actually exists already and has since late November 2024 as a result of the recommendations coming out of the inspector's report.
Well, you see, the Attorney-General is suggesting it would be, to quote the Attorney, preferable for you to declare all relevant affiliations and interactions to the CEO. And in the Commissioner's response, the Commissioner cavils with whether or not the CEO's role extends to matters relating to assessment and investigation of corruption referrals. So that's not the role of the CEO. Is that your view?
Well,
you don't have that role?
It's quite clear if you'd read the legislation, Senator, that my role has no direct decision-making surrounding operational decisions. And that means that I, as the Commissioner has pointed out in his letter, attend as an observer all of the meetings where decisions are made, because if I don't know what is being decided, then it's hard for me to ensure the resourcing is appropriate, that we are dealing with matters in a way which, picks up on some of those earlier questions about where delays might be in the assessment process. It's very, very clear in the Act what the role of the CEO is and what the functions of the Commissioner are. And the Commissioner cannot delegate to me any of his operational powers, functions. They're delegated to Deputy Commissioners and General Managers and others in the organisation. He can direct me to do things, but he's never done that.
So I think the letter says the CEO is aware of the contents of declarations.
That's right.
And will be provided a copy of updated declarations going forward. Is that in writing anywhere?
We've always been provided with declarations of interest.
Is that contained in written policy, this obligation on the Commissioner to declare those matters to the CEO? Is that anywhere in the written policy of the
Well, the terms of reference for the NSAP, as we call it, are clear that any potential conflict, any actual perceived conflicts are put on the table, and if it happened to be about the Commissioner, it would be a Deputy Commissioner making a decision. If it was about a Deputy Commissioner, the Commissioner would make the decision. That's very clear in writing. This, what's referred to here is what's occurred from day one in the Commission, which is that the declarations of interest of the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioners and myself as statutory office holders are shared with that group before they're then provided to the Attorney-General. So that is very clear. There's no doubt that that is the case.
Is it in writing in the procedures and policies of the NACC that the Commissioner has to provide you with all declarations of conflicts of interest and with all declarations about relevant affiliations? Is that in writing in the policy of the NACC anyway?
No, it's not. But the practice is to do exactly what you've said.
All right. When a Commissioner or a Deputy Commissioner is undertaking an investigation, they are often in receipt of highly confidential information, which is protected by statutory secrecy. Do you agree with that, Mr. Reid?
Well, the confidentiality provisions are quite clear in the Act about who's authorised to disclose things and who is what is referred to as entrusted persons. And so we're all very clear in our minds of confidentiality around the work we do.
And if you've got a confidential investigation on foot, you can't just have a quiet chat in a social setting with somebody you know who you think might have something to do with it. You can't just have a quiet social chat with them and ask them about it.
I'm not sure where this is leading, Senator.
Well, you can't disclose confidential information other than in formal actions of the NACC, right? It has to be for the purpose of the NACC and in circumstances where it'll be protected by the confidentiality provisions of the NACC. Do you agree?
I suppose I'm struggling to get an understanding of where you're heading.
You don't have to be worried about where I'm heading. You just have to answer the questions, Mr. Reid.
So
I can restate the question, but maybe you could answer.
In terms of the way that the Act is structured, it's very clear that there are strong confidentiality provisions. There's strong provisions if somebody doesn't abide by those provisions in the Act. There's penalties that can ensue as a result of that. And so everybody in the organisation is aware of that. legislative framework and what that actually means on a day-to-day basis.
And when you say everybody, I assume you're also including the Commissioner in that?
Yes.
So did the Commissioner at any point before November of last year, 6th of November last year, meet with a member of the AFP who was also in the Army Reserves and disclose confidential information to them?
I think I know the issue that you're talking about, and I'm not in a position to discuss a matter that's been referred to us that is under active consideration. So I think at this point I'll just say that we're in the middle of operational work, and as a result of that, we're not going to talk about any operational matters.
This is a matter that was referred to the NACC, but then the NACC, after it appears some input from Commissioner Brereton, referred it back to the agency. So on my understanding, it's not before the NACC, it was referred back to the agency.
Yeah.
Did the Commissioner, in a social setting involving the Army Reserves, disclose confidential information about a NACC referral to a member of the AFP and a fellow member of the Army Reserves about a live NACC investigation that was then referred back to the agency? Did that happen?
So all I'm going to say is that you're talking about a matter that was referred to us that is still under our consideration. I'm not going to go into any great detail about it, and I think what you're asking about is something that I'm just not going to be in a position to talk about, because it will impact on our prejudice our operational work that we're doing, and I think it would be highly improper for me to go any further.
Well,
with this.
my question is, did the Commissioner, not in a formal hearing, not subject to a notice, but in an engagement involving the Army Reserves, not a NACC engagement, an engagement involving the Army Reserves, disclose confidential information, including the names of somebody whose name should not be disclosed, to a member of the AFP who was also a member of the Army Reserves, and do it not in a NACC hearing, not subject to a notice? Did the Commissioner do that?
I've answered that question. It would be improper for me to provide any other details about a matter that is still under active consideration by the Commission.
Well, this is a matter, on my understanding, where following that, for whatever reasons I can't tell, the NACC referred it back to the agency to investigate.
Look,
was that unofficial meeting that disclosed that engagement with the AFP officer and Army Reserve officer, was that material in making the decision to refer it back to the agency?
Senator, you don't know the details of this. I know that you've obviously been given a particular version by someone, but that is not an accurate.
Tell me how I'm wrong.
No, it's just not accurate, and it would be improper for me to consider this, speak about this matter at this point in time.
Are you aware about concerns having been raised with that communication?
I've just made my statement there that clearly you've been given material that could relate to this matter that we're considering at the moment. I'm not going to comment any further.
How many current defence referrals are before the NACC?
So there's, sorry, let me just get to, so we've got the 9 matters that the Commissioner had recused himself from. And we've got 8 other matters that have been allocated subsequent to that recusal on the 31st of October to the deputies for them to deal with. And somewhere here, I had a figure. I'm just trying to find it here in terms of where this sits in the overarching numbers of matters that have. I
to be
think
clear,
we've
that's
answered on
an
notice,
impartial set you've given me. 9 where the NACC
Where there
Commissioner,
was a
because of
recusal, that's
affiliations with units or people he directly served with, recused
That's right.
himself. 8 since then involving defence, which I assume is all of the referrals involving defence since the 31st of October, but it doesn't include however many the Commissioner had been sitting on and taking part in prior to the 31st of October.
Well, he wasn't sitting on matters.
Taking part in.
So there's 8 that were matters that he would have participated in because he didn't have a conflict of interest at the time, that have been transferred to the deputy commissioners for them to manage.
So 8 where he had a role in them, but as a result of the decision of the 31st of October, it's been transferred over. His role has been transferred to deputy commissioners. Is that right?
Well, at any one point in time, the commissioner or deputy commissioners can preside over the matters. There's no issue with that. So now, rather than it being the commissioner, because he's recused himself, it's a deputy commissioner.
Yes. So
and that's a fairly straightforward process.
So there were 8 matters that he had as at the 31st of October, which involved defence, that have been transferred over to deputy commissioners.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's correct.
And have you had legal advice on whether or not his actions up to that point, which may can be validly relied upon, even though there are concerns about conflicts of interest?
Well, what you've got to understand, Senator, is the deputy commissioners participate in discussions around virtually or all investigations that we're undertaking, and not all of these matters are investigations. Some of these matters have been decisions made by the NACC Senior Assessment Panel to still within the assessment process for them to be considered using the preliminary investigation powers. And so that at that point, it's work that is done predominantly by our investigators and brought back to that entity called the National, the NSAP. And as a result of that, everybody will be aware of what was asked of that assessment and the outcome of that assessment, and the decision maker about the outcome of that assessment will no longer be the commissioner.
Okay.
It's a deputy commissioner.
So were there 8 matters where the commissioner was on track to be the decision maker for defence matters that he's now stepped away from, and an alternate deputy commissioner is now the decision maker? That's happened since the 31st of October. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And I asked you before, how many defence referrals are there with the NACC? And I'm not really interested as to whether or not the commissioner had a role in them or didn't have a role in them, bounced back to the deputy commissioner and bounced back to this. Just how many?
I found the question on notice, which was you asked on the 1st of December, this question. We've responded in the lead up to this committee hearing. And the difference of the answer to what I've just said to you was that at that point in time, 1st of December, he'd only recused himself from 7 referrals relating to defence. It's now 8. And he put that on the record at the PJC NACC as part of his... No, just let me finish. Then between the 1st of July 2023 and the 1st of December 2025, there's been a total of 710 referrals that have progressed to and have been subject to a decision at what we call Tier 2. So that's the NSAP process, involving a decision or noting at commissioner, deputy commissioner level. Of the 16, now 17 defence-related referrals the Commissioner has recused himself from represent 2.25% of all referrals from 1 July 2023 to 1 December 2025, which have progressed to the Commissioner or Deputy Commissioners for noting or decision under current processes. The number of open defence-related referrals that have not yet reached a Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner level is approximately 62, so that means that they're still in the assessment phase. And the comparative number of open non-defence related referrals is approximately 775, and of these only a proportion, historically about 18%, and in the current process is likely to be less than that, will require a decision at the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner level. So a very small percent of referrals that have come up through the organisation to the primary body that makes decisions about whether to pursue a matter or not, 2.25% relate to
Ms. Reid,
defence.
I'm not asking for comparisons. I'm not asking for percentages. I'm asking how many defence referrals has the NACC received?
I've told you.
Well, you've said 700 and you said 62 are open. You said something about tier 2 referrals being 775. You must have somewhere just the total number of defence referrals that have been received by the NACC up to today.
Well, there's 62 that are still under
Correct.
consideration,
But I'm not interested.
and therefore,
He wants the aggregate.
Just the total.
yeah.
How many?
But I'll just take that on notice, Senator.
All right. Well, that's what I asked earlier.
Yep.
And I keep getting comparisons and percentages.
Well, it's
How many
because
are
we've
there?
answered this question on notice to you with
you
that
didn't.
information, and it's quite clear in my mind, that we've
you're gonna
provided
tell me
you the
about-
information.
So how many defence referrals have there been in total, in
take that
aggregate,
on notice.
as Senator Scarver helpfully added?
Yep.
How many of the total matters that have gone to the NSAP have involved defence to date as well?
Okay,
All
take
right.
that on notice.
Thank you. We got there. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. That concludes the questions we have for the National Anti-Corruption Commission this evening. Thank you very much for your time. We were due to go to the inspector now, but given it's 5 minutes before dinner time, we might go to dinner.
Very short though.
They're very short?
Very short.
Okay,
We can beat the other committees.
all right. If we feel like we can ask their questions of the inspector reasonably briefly.
We certainly, I think ours will be very brief.
Okay, we invite the inspector to the table. We'll take a very, very brief suspension while we welcome officials. Resume and welcome the Office of the Inspector of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Ms Finesse, would you like to make an opening statement?
The only matter I wanted to deal with was a matter that was raised with Mr Reid, and I think with Ms Ma answered. I received a letter this afternoon from the Commission indicating that they propose to take the approach of not answering questions in relation to my investigation, and I acknowledged and noted that. I certainly agree with the Senator that it's not my role whatsoever to tell the NACC what they should and shouldn't do in relation to this committee.
Thank you for that opening statement. We'll go straight to questions. Senator Blythe.
Thank you, and I promise
Everyone's hungry.
to keep it brief. Thank you very much for appearing. As part of your ongoing investigation into Mr Brereton's involvement in defence-related matters and procurement decisions, how do you assess the concerns raised in the Attorney-General's letter as reported by the ABC?
Well, the terms of my investigation, two matters. The first is the involvement of the Commissioner in referrals made about the Department of Defence, the Australian Defence Force, IGADF as well as ministers and other government departments where the Commissioner had some knowledge from his prior or current involvement with Defence. And the second matter is the ongoing engagement of the Commissioner with the IGADF, including any disclosures made about that involvement. So that probably encompasses the general matters raised in the letter. However, I note that I've only received that correspondence very recently as a result of an FOI application.
Thank you. And I guess just going on to that, how do you think, in your view, the failure of Mr Brereton to disclose impact on the NACC's work and the public perception of this?
All I can say is that from the complaints I have received about the evidence and facts disclosed in documents that have been made public, there has been expressed to me a reduction in confidence of the Commissioner in dealing with defence-related matters because of his not disclosing it to the CEO.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for your efficiency. Senator Shoebridge, let's hope you can do the same.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Inspector, for your attendance and your work. Can you give what your expected timeframe is for dealing with the maladministration and officer misconduct investigation you've commenced in relation to the NACC and the Commissioner?
I've received a deal of information. The most recent was this week. The process now is to review it. The chances of there being material that I still need is quite high, and then I'll have to request that, and there will be a time frame within which that is provided. And then, as indicated earlier, there is a procedure under the legislation, and in any event, I would follow procedural fairness and provide the Commission with a draft report, receive any comments, submissions or extra material they wanted me to consider, and then finalise my report and provide it to the NACC as I have to under the Act, and then form a view as to whether it's in the public interest that I publish all or part of that report.
Yes. So not tomorrow?
Not tomorrow.
No.
Not next week.
No, but probably we would be expecting a matter of months rather than weeks, I assume, to go through that process. Would
yes,
that be a fair?
Correct.
You obviously requested significant amounts of information from the NACC. When did you commence asking for those documents?
In about May, I asked for a very small amount of documents arising from a complaint I'd received, and then after the end of September, when the ABC asked questions of the Commissioner and NACC, I sought further documents in relation to the IGADF, and then as further information emerged, particularly in relation to the disclosure of the ongoing IGADF role, I sought further information.
All right. Now, would your requests have encompassed the correspondence to and from the Attorney General, the Attorney General raising concerns about conflicts of interest, and the Commissioner's response in October of last year?
Well, on a strict reading of my correspondence, no. However, my interest in the topic was well known.
But that correspondence you became aware of not through proactive disclosure from the NACC, but through an FOI, is that right?
That's right.
Do you now have a copy of both of those? Have you now received a copy of both of those pieces of correspondence from the AG and from the Commissioner?
A person provided them to me, I think last week or perhaps shortly before last week. So I have both of the letters from them.
But to be clear, they didn't come from the NACC, despite your multiple requests for information about conflicts of interest and the like.
That's right, but I repeat what I said. Strictly, it wasn't encompassed, but more generally, my interest was well known. Since then, I have contacted the NACC and expressed disappointment that they hadn't provided it to me, and then they subsequently provided it to me.
And did they have an explanation for why they didn't provide it to you?
Oh, I think that's probably a matter for them to explain why.
You're probably right, Inspector. Can I ask you again about adequacy of resources for dealing with this? It appears that this is quite a significant task.
It is.
Have you got adequate resources to deal with it?
I do.
And you've got the adequate budget to call in additional assistance as needed to deal with this?
I do.
All right. Thanks, Inspector.
Thank you.
Can I ask just one follow-up question on that?
If it's very brief in its asking.
Very, very brief, and I've noted your carefully crafted, if I can call it that way, statement in relation to the provision of the letter. Strictly speaking, it didn't strictly fall within the ambit of your request, but more generally, your interest was well known in relation to the subject matter. Can I just ask you for the record, was it your reasonable expectation in all the circumstances, given your interest in the generally your interest in the matter was well known, was it your reasonable expectation that it would have been given to you, notwithstanding the fact that it was strictly not within the specific ambit of your request?
Senator, if I can repeat what I said to Senator Shoebridge, and I hope it satisfactorily answers your question, I was disappointed not to have received it from the NACC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your efficiency, Senator Scarr. That's all the questions that we have for you this evening. Thank you very much for your time.